In this photography lesson, I'm going to explain why your photos often turn out blurry, not sharp at all. I'll teach you how to get tack-sharp images across the entire frame. We'll talk about what settings affect blurriness, what hyperfocal distance is, what focus stacking means, and how to use both to make sure your photos are always razor sharp. You'll also learn when your lens actually prevents you from getting sharp images, and how to fix that. Hi everyone, my name is Alexander Ippolitov. My photographs and articles have been published by National Geographic and Discovery. Alright, let's not waste time. Let's dive right in. There are several reasons why your photos may come out blurry. And the first reason, the most common one, is that either you or your camera picked the wrong shutter speed. Let's look at a typical scenario. You're shooting handheld, and in low light conditions, you often end up with photos that are blurry due to motion. The good news is, you can avoid this simply by setting the correct shutter speed. There's what photographers call a safe handheld shutter speed. Safe for everyone who doesn't suffer from Parkinson's, of course. So, how do we calculate this safe speed? It's based on your focal length. The formula is super simple. 1 divided by twice the focal length. For example, if you're shooting at 50 millimeters, your safe handheld shutter speed should be 100 second or faster. If you're shooting at 14 millimeters, then your safe speed is around 128 second or faster. The longer the focal length of your lens, the shorter your shutter speed needs to be to avoid motion blur. So when you're shooting with a telephoto lens in low light, you might face some challenges keeping your images sharp while shooting handheld. And you'll probably need to bump up your ISO quite a bit. But that's a topic for another lesson. Now, let's move on to other causes of blurry photos. The ones that can occur even when your camera settings seem just right. Very often when you shoot, you might notice that the edges of your frame aren't sharp. The center is nice and crisp, but everything toward the edges looks soft or slightly out of focus. That edge blur actually comes from your lens. Unfortunately, it's a common issue with affordable all-purpose lenses. But don't be upset, and don't run out to buy a new expensive lens just yet. Even budget lenses can produce sharp, beautiful images. The problem usually happens when you shoot with your aperture wide open. And this isn't really about depth of field. It's about the optical design and the quality of the glass. Manufacturers try to make universal lenses as compact as possible. Because of that, they can't always build an optical system that stays perfectly sharp across all apertures and focal lengths. If they did, the lens would be much bigger, heavier, and more expensive. So, as I said, that soft edge effect comes from shooting at the widest aperture. If your zoom lens opens up to say f3.5, try not to use that aperture when shooting landscapes. It's okay for portraits, as long as the center of the frame stays sharp, but for wide shots, it's not ideal. For example, if you have something like the Sigma 17 to 70mm lens, at 17mm it can open up to f2.8. That's great on paper, but I wouldn't recommend using f2.8 for landscape photography. And as for portraits, well, you can shoot at 17mm, but the facial distortion will be quite strong, and as soon as you zoom in a bit, that lens's aperture drops to f4. Does that mean this lens can't deliver great images? Not at all. It absolutely can, and it can give you amazing shots, but we'll get to that in a bit. The main takeaway here, don't expect edge-to-edge sharpness at the widest apertures of a universal zoom lens. The sweet spot for sharpness usually comes when you stop down the aperture a bit, and the best way to find it is to run a quick test. Here's how to do it. Mount your camera on a tripod and hang a test chart or target on a wall perpendicular to your lens. You can download a test chart online. I'll leave a link in the video description. If your lens has image stabilization, turn it off for this test. Then, take a series of shots at different apertures and focal lengths. After that, check the images on your computer monitor, not the camera screen, and compare sharpness across the frame. Find the aperture where the sharpness is at its best. That's the one you should use. For most zoom lenses, the sharpest results appear around f7.1 or so. But again, test your own lens to be sure. Using extremely small apertures. For example, If you shoot at f22, you'll never get a perfectly sharp image. Everything will look slightly soft, even if your focus is correct. That's because of a physical optical phenomenon called diffraction. When light passes through a tiny aperture, it starts bending and scattering, which reduces sharpness. So, don't close your aperture down to extreme values unless you absolutely have to. On full-frame cameras, diffraction becomes noticeable around f16. On APS-C cameras, it starts around f13. That covers the technical issues. Now, let's talk about the most common and interesting one: incorrect focusing. If you focus on the wrong spot in the scene, parts of your photo will fall outside the depth of field, and you'll lose overall sharpness. To avoid that, you need to understand what hyperfocal distance is and how to use it properly. The hyperfocal distance is the focusing distance that gives you the maximum possible depth of field. In simple terms, if you focus on a point 10 meters away, under certain settings, you'll get sharpness not only at that point, but also in everything behind it, and even halfway toward you. So if your subject is at 10 meters, everything from 5 meters to infinity will be sharp. To calculate hyperfocal distance, you need 3 things. 1. The focal length of your lens. 2. The circle of confusion. Don't worry, I'll explain. 3. The aperture value. You don't really need to get too technical here. Just remember these base values. For full-frame cameras, the circle of confusion is 0.03. For APS-C cameras, it's 0.02. And for aperture, anything between f7.1 and f13 usually works great for landscapes. Now, let's calculate it. Suppose you're shooting with a 24mm lens at f10. Your hyperfocal distance will be about 1.92 meters, just under 2 meters. That means, if you focus on something roughly 1.9 meters away, everything from about 0.96 meters, half that distance, to infinity will be sharp. So if you focus at 2 meters, everything from just under a meter away from you all the way to the horizon will be in focus. Pretty cool, right? If you want to dive deeper into how this works and master sharp focusing techniques step by step, check out my full photography course. I am a photographer. The link is in the description below. Now, understanding hyperfocal distance is super useful, but it's not a magic fix for everything. There are plenty of cases when your scene has a beautiful foreground, maybe flowers, rocks, or texture, that sits closer than half the hyperfocal distance. In that case, even with a narrow aperture, you simply can't keep the whole scene sharp in one shot. And that's when a powerful technique comes to the rescue: focus stacking. So what is focus stacking? And how do you do it? It's a method where you take 2 or more photos from the same position, each focused on a different part of the scene. For example, if your foreground is close to the lens, start by taking 1 photo focused on that foreground. Just make sure your subject isn't closer than the minimum focusing distance of your lens. That's usually written right on the lens barrel. Then, take a second shot focused on the middle ground, and a third one focused on the background. Sometimes 2 shots are enough. Other times, you might need 4 or more. It depends on the scene. Later, you blend these shots together in Photoshop to get one perfectly sharp image across the entire frame. The downside? You need to shoot from a tripod, because the camera must stay exactly in the same position. Shooting handheld just won't work. Even the smallest movement will mess up alignment. But when done properly, this focus stacking method gives you a guaranteed win, and I personally use it a lot. Let me quickly show you how to blend stacked images in Photoshop. First, open Photoshop and load your photos, the one shot with different focus points. I'll use just 2 shots to show you the process, but you can use more if needed. Go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack. Click Browse, select your files, and press OK. Make sure to check Attempt to automatically align source images. This helps if there were small shifts during shooting. Once loaded, you'll see both photos stacked as layers in one document. If your Photoshop version doesn't have the Load into Stack option, you can also go to File, Automate, Photo Merge. select your images, uncheck Blend Images Together, and click OK. Now, you'll have both layers ready to work with. Select both layers, hold Ctrl, and click each layer. Then go to Edit, Auto Blend Layers. Choose Stack Images, and hit OK. Voila! Photoshop automatically merges them into one perfectly sharp image. Both the lighthouse and the flowers in the foreground are crisp, but look closely. While this looks great at first glance, there's a small issue. I only used 2 photos, one focused on the flowers, one on the lighthouse. I didn't take a shot focused on the midground, hoping it wouldn't be noticeable. But you can see that the vegetation in that middle area is slightly soft. So don't make my mistake. When you're shooting landscapes for focus stacking, always take at least 3 shots. One for the foreground, one for the middle, and one for the background. Those are the key things you need to know to get consistently sharp photos. And of course, don't forget the basics. Use a tripod when needed, and turn off image stabilization when shooting long exposures or when your camera is on a tripod. If any of this still feels confusing, my course, I Am a Photographer, will walk you through all of it step by step. The link is below this video. That's all for today. Take care of yourself, and happy shooting!